Welcome, folks. Today's Adult Forum, we have two guest speakers, and it's going to be the power of place and movement, pilgrimage. And we have the Reverend Canon Kirk, Berlenbach, and our very own Emily Gibbon. And they're going to be going through setting off on a pilgrimage in an invitation to be transformed by sacred spaces and to make ordinary spaces sacred by special intention. It is a movement of the body so that the movement of the spirit can be realized in our lives. Through their experiences in Ireland, the Holy Land, and Philadelphia, Kirk and Emily will share how ancient acts of pilgrimage are possible in countless ways and in the spiritual practice, so you could try this summer.
Yeah.
Okay. So.
Thank you so much. And for those of you joining us online, we would love to be able to communicate with you through formation questions at stdavids.org. So we'll be checking those, so if there's things that you want to know or things you would like to add to the conversation, we can do that too. Oh, I'm so sorry. stdavidschurch.org. Thank you very much. So formation questions at stdavidschurch.org, which is a very, very long email. But if you're joining us online, there's a way to click directly into that.
All right. Well, thank you so much, friends. Are volumes good on this? Everybody hear me okay? Great. Hope everybody on online can hear as well. My name is Kirk Berlenbach. I serve as one of the canons for growth and support as part of the staff of the offices of the Diocese of Pennsylvania. And so part of what I do is work to focus to equip our churches to find new ways to be the church, to live faithfully into their call to proclaim the gospel of Jesus Christ in the 21st century with all of the challenges and opportunities that come along with that. But it's my great pleasure to be here with you at St. David's to talk a little bit about pilgrimage with my friend Emily. Emily and I have known each other for more than 20 years in this diocese.
When I was still a teenager.
Absolutely.
Almost.
And so it's wonderful to be here with you today. This program is going to be part of our Servium Institute, which is the online comprehensive learning platform developed as part of our bishop's vision to equip our churches, particularly our laity, with the tools and information they need to be able to live into their call and ministry to serve our churches and proclaim the gospel. And one of the great things about Servium is that it's meant to be sort of a crowd-sharing model. We encourage our churches, our clergy, our laity, as they have talent and inspiration and knowledge, to share that so that the rest of the diocese can benefit. And we know that St. David's has so many gifts, so much talent. We did the program on spiritual direction late last year. That's posted to the Servium platform and is very popular, so we're excited to be continuing to develop content with you. So thank you for this opportunity to be here with you.
Yeah.
So let's move to the slide with the scripture as we go into our discussion of pilgrimage.
Oh, it helps if I'm pointing it in the right direction. What do you think? Oh, why is it not working? Hey, sweet friends. Oop, there we go.
Sure, why don't we switch on to that? Thank you. Super. Oh, that's much better. Wonderful. So when we say the word pilgrim, and I need answers for this, what's the first thing that comes to mind? The first thing, not the most sacred thing, the first thing. John Wayne, thank you. I was going to call you out if somebody didn't say John Wayne. That's right. Or, right, the Thanksgiving, the people in the funny hats, all that. In fact, pilgrimage is an ancient spiritual practice. To be a pilgrim is in fact part of our call as Christians, as sojourners or pilgrims in this world. That's sort of betwixt and between, navigating that sacred path. So to focus on a pilgrimage as a spiritual practice is what we're going to talk about today. Pilgrimage within Judeo-Christian tradition has its origins with Abraham, right? Who was a sojourner. He left his home to follow God's call to go to a different place and to be transformed along the way. In the time of Jesus, devout Jews were expected to make a pilgrimage to Jerusalem 3 times a year. So as you can see, this is not something new, not a new idea. Among Christians, as Christianity became established, it was customary to try to make a pilgrimage to those places that were associated with Jesus. Let's see. Oh, we've got the scripture up still. Can we go to the next slide? Sorry about that.
There we go.
There we go. Places associated with Jesus' life, ministry, and his miracles. So in particular, we know that Jerusalem became a site during the whole Byzantine period. There was a massive movement of pilgrims from Europe and the rest of the Near East to Jerusalem as Christians came to these holy sites. I want you to imagine, though, what it meant to be a pilgrim in those days, in those times. No, we're still on the previous slide. You know, you couldn't just go to Newark Airport and get on a direct flight to Tel Aviv and then take a nice bus. Pilgrimage came at enormous personal expense. It was kind of a once-in-a-lifetime, if you were fortunate enough and wealthy enough to be able to afford it, to undertake. It also came with great personal risk. Imagine going by ship in wooden ancient ships across the sea. You risked storms and pirates. Going across land, you risked disease, robbery, getting lost, running out of food, running out of water. There's a reason why, in fact, the first hospice was established on the island of Malta. We know what hospice is, right? Today, making a place and space for people to die, oftentimes at home. Well, the first hospice was established on Malta for pilgrims who died on their way to Jerusalem. It was a big deal, a massive undertaking to try to go to make this pilgrimage. So imagine the call that people had, that commitment, that desire to see these places. That's what we can connect with still today, and we want to talk about that a little bit. We're going to come to, in pilgrimage today, there's all sorts of ways that we can talk about that, and I'm going to get to that in a second. Pilgrimage, though, also in the Christian tradition is not unique to the Judeo-Christian tradition, right? In the Muslim tradition, the Hajj, a once-in-a-lifetime pilgrimage to Mecca. Pilgrimage also has become secular, right? I'm going to go make a pilgrimage to Graceland, or Cooperstown, or the Hollywood Walk of Fame, or Disney. Some of you make that pilgrimage multiple times, I know. But that idea of going somewhere special, somewhere that holds great meaning for you, in the hopes that you will have an experience that is transformative. That is the essence of pilgrimage. So let's talk about, where do people go on pilgrimage today, right? It's not just Jerusalem. It's not just the Holy Land. It's a global phenomena. The Holy Land, Rome, the Camino de Santiago in Spain, Lourdes, Fatima, Guadalupe, Canterbury, Celtic sites in Ireland and Scotland, Assisi, St. Catherine's Monastery in Egypt, Mount Athos. There's many, many others that aren't as well known in our tradition because they're held in the Eastern Orthodox tradition or they're located in the global South. But it is across the world that there are holy sites that people make a pilgrimage to. With that, I want to turn it over to Emily to talk a little bit about the spiritual principles.
Sure. So, Kirk, what you might not know is that there are people in our midst today that have been to the Holy Land, some of these other pilgrimages that we're talking about. But just like Kirk was saying that it's not if you're a baseball person, you're going to Cooperstown, there really is a different feeling about what it means to be setting this time aside. So a pilgrimage is a spiritual journey. It's not a vacation or a sightseeing trip. It's a time for you to really disrupt what is your normal life, what your rhythm is, so that you can feel a difference, notice things about yourself as you're in a different space. So it takes you out of your normal mindset. Sometimes we get in the rhythm of Monday looks like this, or weekday looks like this, and it really is meant to open you up to a different space. And that pilgrimage is not about getting to somewhere. It is really about a journey, not just the destination. What do you see, and who do you meet, and what does it feel like to be moving towards that holy space? So it puts oneself in the right mindset, a spirit that's important to let go of your preconceptions. What does it mean to step out of yourself for a little bit and to feel in a different way, to be present and attentive? And, all of this is really like just noticing yourself as you're moving towards that holy space. And to please note that none of these principles necessitate an exotic location, right? So we have the ability to go to these amazing, wonderful places and encounter the divine, but we also know part of what I'm going to talk about later is how you can actually have a pilgrimage in your daily life. How can you look around in your places and make them sacred? Yeah.
So it's great that it's wonderful that so many of you have had the chance to go to the Holy Land. So that's what we want to talk about for a minute. I know that many have, but many have not. So let's talk about what that is like and what some of the things that one might encounter if you do go on pilgrimage to the Holy Land. Not surprisingly, much of what a Christian might focus on when we go to the Holy Land are sites that are associated with Jesus. This could be the Church of the Resurrection, also known as the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, or the Via Dolorosa that goes through Jerusalem following the original idea of the Stations of the Cross. It can be going up to the Temple Mount. It can be the upper room, of which there are two places that say, no, we're the real upper room. The one is in a basement, but of course that would have been an upper room at the time because the city has grown up in height over the millennia. Bethlehem, St. Peter's Gallicantum, which is the church that is built at the site that would have been Caiaphas's house, where Jesus might have even been held in a cell there. There are cells in the basement that are quite powerful to experience. Going to the Sea of Galilee, where it's quite remarkable. I'll talk about that in a second. When we go to these places, what they allow us to do is to imagine Jesus in this very spot, or if not in this very spot, in a spot very near here, or very much like this. If it looked or felt or smelled in a particular way, Jesus probably saw very similar things, experienced a very similar experience when he was here, preaching to the disciples, teaching the people, healing, casting out demons, or in places where he had been arrested, placed in a prison cell. There is in St. Peter's Gallicantum, in one of the cells they would have been lowered down from a rope by their hands because there's no other way in and out of the cell. And then there's a place where they would have been bound and scourged. And you go in these places and you can imagine, was Jesus here? What did he think? What did he feel? What pain did he endure? Enormously powerful experiences. Now, some of the places in Jerusalem that are most popular and considered the most holy, it's very hard in the Church of the Resurrection to get a sense of quiet or stillness, because unless you go at 4:30 in the morning when it opens, or unless you choose to stay overnight and get locked in, there's hundreds and thousands of people milling around you, some of whom are very devout in their attitude, some of whom are more casual in their attitude, and it can be hard to get quiet and spiritual and still. But in the Church of the Resurrection, one of my favorite places, and can we go to the next slide, please? There we go. Behind the Episcopal, there's the Chapel of Joseph of Arimathea. The Episcopal is the grand structure built over the tomb that was Jesus' tomb. Tucked away behind that, behind the Syriac altar, there's the Chapel of Joseph of Arimathea, and nobody goes there. And it's an ancient tomb site, but there's sort of an altar that's kind of falling down, and a candle in a grandstand that's guttering away. And that was a place where I found peace and the chance to connect spiritually with what this place was. And in the Episcopal itself, you can't really have the time because there's crowds in and out all the time. So it's finding the place in the pilgrimage, right? It's not always in the grand, trumpeted, fanfared places where you're going to find that deep connection to God. It may be in something that's out of the way and unusual. Now, in contrast, next slide, please, to the Holy Land, I've had the privilege of going to Celtic Ireland, both for leading a youth pilgrimage, was my first time, way back in the year 2000, and I've been many times since with my family, and have maintained friends there, and did my sabbatical, actually, a number of years ago in Ireland to study Celtic spirituality. It stands in great contrast to the hustle and bustle of Rome. What's interesting about Celtic Ireland is that there were Christians there before St. Patrick. I know it's widely believed that St. Patrick helped to popularize and spread Christianity, but there were Christians there for a very, very, very long time. And many of the holy sites are built in conjunction with pre-Christian holy sites. So when you go to some of these places, some of them are older than the places in Jerusalem in terms of being recognized or revered as a place to connect with the divine. It's quite interesting. Some of them also are very remote. They're off in the country. Sometimes you have to climb over fences and avoid what happens when you're walking through a cow pasture to get to these places. It's a very different experience. Many of them are ruins, thank you, Oliver Cromwell. Because of the British occupation, many of these churches were destroyed or displaced in persecution. But they're still there and they're still revered. Some of them, also the Vikings had a hand in that too. That was Clonmacnoise, the monastic city at the center of Ireland. There was two rivers that come together, so it was very easy for the Vikings to sail their longships right up to that and raid it, and that got raided repeatedly until it was eventually abandoned. But yet some of the things that make it a holy site are still there. That sense of the presence of God is still there. So it's a much different experience in that one has the opportunity to get that quiet, to get that sense of, I'm alone with God if I want to be, and I get to pray and be quiet and be sensitive to that. I want to talk about, if we can go to the next slide, please. One more, please. Perfect. Talking about some of the places, there's the monastic city of Glendalough, which is south of Dublin in the Wicklow Mountains. There are Clonmacnoise, I just talked about. There's lots of wells, some of which are dedicated to St. Bridget. The picture here in the lower corner, actually the water, it's quite different. The water flows out of two large stone breasts, which is very different, not something that's commonly encountered in much of the rest of the Christian tradition. Crowpatrick, the mountain associated with St. Patrick, pilgrims will often climb that mountain, and it's mountains in the sense that the Poconos are mountains compared to the Rockies or something like that, but they'll do that pilgrimage barefoot as a way of showing their devotion. Skellig Michael, which was made popular in some of the recent Star Wars movies, where Luke is, that's Skellig Michael, pretty cool place. There's many, many hundreds, thousands of other places. One of my favorite places was on the Aran Islands, and that's where I spent a good part of my sabbatical. And some of these places are so sort of lost in legend that they're not frequently used for worship or devotion today. But I had the chance when I was leading the pilgrimage in 2000, our guide there was also a priest, and he took us to an altar associated with St. Enda. And St. Enda brought Christianity to the Aran Islands. And the legend has it that St. Enda, when meeting with the chieftain who ruled the island, said, okay, I'm bringing you the real God, and he says, the chieftain says, well, prove it. If your God's really God, then you're going to be able to perform some sort of a miracle to show his power. And Enda says, okay, I'm going to take this barrel and I'm going to throw it off the end of the island. And if the barrel comes back, then you'll know that my God brought it here and that my God's power is real. And the chieftain says, fine, he's been fishing those waters his whole life. He knows that it's going straight to Iceland. It's no way it's coming back based on the current. Well, sure enough, the barrel comes back and the altar is built on that site. So we're there and we decide to celebrate Holy Communion on St. Enda's altar, which was really cool. But the coolest thing was I was serving as the deacon. So I did mention cows, right? These things are in active farmers' fields. So there's cows everywhere, and we're there with our pilgrims, our youth pilgrims, and I go out to read the gospel, and it had been raining. It is Ireland, that happens. And all the cows were kneeling down. So I bring out the gospel of our Lord Jesus Christ according to Luke, and all the cows stand up.
Yeah.
Truth.
Yeah.
It's truth. You have these opportunities for these amazing holy experiences that are very different than Rome or Jerusalem or some of the popular places that are more built up. So, with that said, I want to bring it back to Emily to talk about pilgrimage and daily life.
Yeah, I wonder if anyone has something that they'd like to share from their experience of pilgrimage. Is there anybody here who has been? Yeah, we'd love to hear your experiences.
Hi, yes. I actually went on a pilgrimage to Glendalough and the Aran Islands as well, and it truly is a magical place. I did that when I was a teenager. I actually turned 16 on the pilgrimage. Wow. And then I had the opportunity to chaperone a pilgrimage to Patmos in Greece, where St. John wrote the book of Revelations. And both were just transformative in their own right. One just being a teenager and the other trying to control teenagers. But it was truly like a magical magical trip. And then, there's things that happen that you kind of realize like later on, kind of like retrospectively. And I think that's been kind of the more benefit. It's like looking back and just how those trips kind of like transform your life like gradually over time. So.
Yeah, so it's not just a moment, right? It really is a piece of you. Yeah, anybody else have something they'd like to
Yeah, I was fortunate enough to go on a pilgrimage just this past January, February, and it was an amazing experience. And I'd echo what Kirk said earlier about opening yourself up to experiences there. You experience things as a group, you experience things as an individual, and then I'm Jay Baldwin. Chris, as Chris said, later on, there's a revelation. This Easter was so different for me, and
yes.
So it's kind of the gift that keeps giving. And also another thing, don't be afraid to go to a site more than once, because we're a church of Sepulchre.
Holy Sepulchre, yeah.
There was, it's crowded beyond belief. We went back at 6 a.m. the next morning, and it was much quieter. I mean, there were still hundreds and hundreds of people there. But because you'd been there earlier and you'd been oriented a little bit, it was much easier to, just absorb some of the spirit.
Sure, to be open to it, yeah.
So it's just, if you ever get a chance, do it. It's just an amazing, amazing experience.
And a lot of the stories from this last trip were people being surprised by smaller places that wouldn't have been big on the map, but were deeply, deeply the place where they experience God. So I think the invitation is to always be keeping our eyes open and not just sort of what's on the tour guide. Yeah, go ahead.
When St. David's Choir went to Ireland a couple of years ago, we went to Glendalough, and when you got off the bus, a number of people talked about you could feel the spirit. You literally could. Yeah. It was different in many ways. And we had several hours to wander around on our own and go to different places. It's just an incredible experience wherever you were. And then we got to sing in that beautiful stone chapel with the stone ceiling.
Yeah.
They unlocked the gates and let us go in and sing in that. And it was, I don't know how to describe it.
Yeah.
It's just unbelievable.
So, what's about 10 years ago now? Amy comes home from church and says St. David's is running this pilgrimage to the Holy Land. I said, you should go on that trip. That'll be a great trip for you. And she was like, we're going to both go. I was like, okay, great. And so I had honestly, I had low expectations. It was not on my list. And I'm really glad I went. But something I wanted to mention was, you know, Kirk, I think you talked about this one says it's the upper room and this other one says it's the upper room. And we went to a place that was we went to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. And we went to another place where Jesus was alleged to have been, laid to rest. And I came back with this idea that it kind of doesn't matter because of the power of these places that have been venerated for thousands of years at this point. On their own, just because of that veneration and then the persistence of that veneration is in itself powerful and transformative.
That's exactly right, because it's not a fact-finding mission, right? It's
Exactly. Yeah.
And you're right, even if it was just sort of the corner store, if everyone came and offered their blessings, like we ourselves make things holy, for sure, yeah, in addition to God. Yeah, Karen.
We can't leave the British Isles without going to Scotland and going to Iona
Yes.
and going to Holy Island. And I went with a group to doing that kind of pilgrimage, and it also is just absolutely transformative. Iona has a worldwide community of individuals who are associated with it, even though they're not going to services there. But I came home with a prayer book from that, and so many places that are in the middle of fields where there are statuaries, where there are places of worship or of veneration in this vast, what seems like a vast area when you're walking around. They say that you have to go back to Iona 3 times. I'm not sure that's going to happen for me, but I wouldn't mind. It's very special.
Yeah. Well, there's power in 3, right? That's
Yes.
one of our important things. Yeah. So part of what we know is that these bigger holy pilgrimages are possible for, that we do them here, there's opportunities, but we also know that sometimes financially that's not possible, sometimes time it's not possible, and so then the invitation is to figure out how to consider your daily life. What are the opportunities for pilgrimage just here in Wayne, just in your, whatever your circle is? And so the invitation first is to understand that sacred space is all around us, and that our invitation really is to just notice. Part of it is that the holy pilgrimage is just the noticing of God in our midst and us wanting to move towards that. And so daily lives, it can be a conversation of an ongoing movement towards God. And then how do we move with intention? What does our day look like? How do we spend some time that's set apart? Where are there close by places that might be considered holy or be made holy by our prayers? So you might have a space in your home or a home altar or a place, and if you go to that place with intention, that is in some ways a mini pilgrimage. It is certainly not, getting on the airplane and going, but what does it mean to ask God to meet you somewhere? And so that can happen in your garden, it can happen here in the midst of things. So the power of movement and intention, and just like Jesus is, like the incarnational element of pilgrimage is because God came to us in a body in Jesus so that we would use our bodies then to go and know Jesus more. So I'm wondering, just before we even talk about that a little bit more, is there a spot that you feel like you go to that helps you connect with God more? Is there a space here locally or even just sort of geographically? Yeah. So we're going to use a microphone just so our friends at home can hear.
For me, it's our own church. Every time I step in there, sometimes during the week, if I drive by, I'll just stop there. And I think about the hundreds of years of faithful worshipers who would go there and pray, and surrounded by all those buried faithful. For me, that's a pretty powerful space.
Yeah, exactly. And what you might not know is it's unlocked all week all weekend, I mean, all week long, actually. So you could come and be in that space. Absolutely, yeah. And you really can feel the prayers of generations, for sure.
Hi there. I'll put in a plug for outdoors
Okay.
in general. Some years ago, geez, probably close to 20 years ago, we took the youth group here on a pilgrimage out into the woods. Most of them have never done anything like that, camped and such. And that can be a very spiritual place when you're by yourself out there and you're feeling creation and away from your everyday life. When you're out there, you're concentrating just on what you're doing there, and it really can help you think differently and see things differently.
Yeah, especially if you turn your technology off, right, and really are present. Part of that is the trick, really making space, undivided space, for God to break in, for sure, right? Yeah, what were you going to say?
Well, since you were talking about on a journey, so whenever I go on vacation, I always try to pick a spot. Like when we traveled across country, we stopped at the church that had the miracle stairwell. And then we also stopped where Reverend Martin Luther King died, because that was a spiritual thing. He was a reverend and he was a leader.
Yeah.
And same with the church it was a very old church, and there was a miracle stairwell in it. So even though I was going on other vacations and visiting family, I always picked other places too.
Sure. And that's part of why we did this at the end of the program year, is to say, like, how could your summer actually have an element of pilgrimage? You might have a vacation planned already, but look around and see what is there that you could visit that's both technically, historical or theologically significant, or something that other people know, but then also, like, what could be a place that you visit and revisit as your pilgrimage? Yeah. Anybody else have a place or a spot that's important to them?
Emily, can I
Yeah.
just I
Sure.
think with the mindset too, I mean, I love your idea of talking about summer and summer travel.
Yeah.
I don't know if this is going to resonate for anybody here, but for me, I always am like okay, how do I break the land speed record to get to the destination? Like, I set a time and it should take exactly that much time, and I'm going to get there ahead of that. And what do I rob myself of? What does that mindset rob me of the ability to say, you know what? Oh, this looks good. Let me just pull over here. Maybe just to read the historical marker. Or, oh, that looks like a cute town or a fun diner or something. Just to that ability to slow down and be present, because it's when we do that that we create the opportunity for God to surprise us.
And we did that a little bit. So the mission trip this summer was actually equal parts pilgrimage and mission trip with our teenagers, because we wanted to really communicate, we're going to Kentucky, and we don't want to walk in knowing like we know what people need and what we're going to do, but how do we come into a space, look around, see what God is doing already in that space, and then also just wonder in the beauty of what is there, and to understand that people walk in sacred space all the time. Right. So we think about some of those big concepts that we know in terms of going away. It's like, what is God calling us to? And what might we go to meet God there? Areas in our lives that need disruption. I think that's the biggest part. If we're talking about daily or close by pilgrimage, when we get into a rhythm that isn't serving us anymore, what could we do? Where could we go? Even if it is simply to come over here and walk the grounds. Yeah, were you going to say, Anthony?
Yeah, and what Reverend Kirk said about being present, that's, I think, when we're just going too fast sometimes, even God is going to do things in our lives to slow us down so we can get that being present and having that spiritual interaction.
Yeah. And also looking at the people that you're journeying with. Oftentimes it is the people that you're spending time with just as much as the places that you're going and the things that you're learning. What does it mean to be on a path with other people who are looking and trying to find a deeper understanding of God? And then, honestly, what are you already doing that if you just looked at it in a different way could be transformed into pilgrimage? So if you have a group of friends that meet and gather and have a cup of coffee, how could you then actually go to somewhere beautiful, put down the cup of coffee, have a conversation that is not just about what's going on with the newest friends, but what's happening in your lives? How do you notice God in this moment? And so just the idea of how could, I love the concept. There was a book a while ago that said, my minivan is my monastery. So how do we look at, as family, as monastic domestic community and how you can live into what it means to be present and to be journeying together in your daily life. So, and then think about what sacred spaces that might be discovered or rediscovered. You know, what's a part of your history? I grew up going to summer camp in Cape May, New Jersey, and I find that now going back there as an adult with my own children feels like a holy pilgrimage. I went to Holiday House. Some of you know Holiday House is a thing. So it is a way to go and be at the beach, but it's also, there's a chapel there, and I spend time doing daily prayer and that sort of thing. So how do you pick up a prayer book? Honestly, don't tell anybody. Don't tell anybody on the live stream, but if you do not have your own prayer book, grab one out of the pew today and take it home with you. Because even just simply opening up a prayer book in an ordinary space can be, all right, one of the wardens, or two of the wardens are here, I'm busted, so I can't, three, we got, all of you are here, I'm done. But yeah, if you, whatever you need as resource, please let me know. I love being able to do that with you, but pick up a prayer book and just be in a space that's unexpected, and you can transform it into a holy spot. But there are some practical ways that we can talk about going and doing something that feels a little bit more like a traditional pilgrimage. What would it be like to go to someone else's faith community and just be in that space and marvel at the prayers of others? You know, we have our prayers in our space, but be in that presence and feel what is the iconography in their building, the way that it's set up. What does it mean to really just revel in the different ways that God is showing up in faith communities? We talked a little bit, Jeff, about nature, doing places that are significant historically or theologically or spiritually, and we have a lot of those here in the Philadelphia area, and I'm going to talk a little bit specifically about one of mine, but then also reclaiming spaces maybe that have had a part of your story that you either love or don't love. What does it mean to have pilgrimage as a way of healing and bringing wholeness in your life? And then also, journeying towards people. I think we underestimate what it means to love one another and to know God through each other. So who could you go and spend time with that would help you see the face of God? And then we were talking, just like you were talking about, Marianne, how to reimagine or transform your summer vacation. Like if you have a place at the beach, or if you have a mountain house, or you go just around the corner because it's your favorite spot, how can you be watching and waiting for ways to create holy moments? Yeah. So I wanted to tell you a little bit about one of my holy pilgrimages. So many of you know that I am in the last bits of seminary to become a priest in the church. And so when I started seminary, it was in the middle of COVID. And I thought, and I had been someone who discerned the priesthood when I was in my 20s, and then decided that I was going to do some of the other sacraments like marriage and baptism first. And so it took me about 20 years to get back to discerning the priesthood. And so I thought, as a female human discerning this call, that I should go somewhere significant in the female history of our church. And so the Church of the Advocate, which is at 18th and Diamond here in Philadelphia, is the place where the Philadelphia 11, the first women were ordained in the Episcopal Church. And because it was COVID, it was locked up tight, and no one had been in there for about 6 months. So when they opened up, I called and said, I think I'm going to make a pilgrimage, do you mind? And they thought that I was kind of a little crazy. They're like, P.S. it's COVID, and P.S. like you live around the corner, what are you doing? So, but I said, this is really important to me. I let them know why. And so we opened up the doors, and like just the humidity and all of the closed doorness of it just sort of hit us in the face. And I went there because it felt important to me to stand in that same spot where those first women stood as I began that journey. But I didn't want to do it by myself, because part of what we're talking about is journeying together. And so I have a dear, dear friend who is a man of color, and he brought his first grade son, and we went to the Advocate together because actually the Advocate is important for both of us, for all of us, because not only is it the site of the first ordination of women, but it really was the center of a lot Black Power movement and Black National Congress, and really important times there. You can actually still go and see some of the pictures there around there. It was a church that was in a neighborhood that was changing, and so the stained glass windows have these milky white faces, very, very white faces. And then as the neighborhood changed and as the congregation changed, it was really important to uplift and make sacred Black and brown bodies. And so you'll see here, there's actually, this is just one example, but there's these huge murals going all the way around the building, and they've become quite famous, honestly, but to see them in the midst of all of that. And so, like I said, we brought a first grader along with us, and he's looking at me like, why did you bring me along to this? This is just weird. So he's laying down on this carpeted sort of riser, and I said to him, I said, Alex, can I lay down with you? And so we're laying down, and he's looking up, and he asked me, like, why did you bring me here? And I said, well, some places are so holy that we just have to share them. And I talked a little bit about why it was important to me because of the women that were ordained there, but then also him as a child of color, that this is very much a part of his story as a child growing up in Philadelphia. So the idea is, like, what is here in your midst that you could just recognize as holy and move towards? Kirk, I wonder if you want to add anything to that.
Nothing comes to mind right now, because I think you've done a beautiful job articulating that it's all around us all the time, and it's really about putting ourselves in the correct mindset to be able to perceive it and to receive it. Thank you. Yeah.
And I'm thinking about, so we talked about pilgrimage as seeing holy images, but also pilgrimage can be a way of righting wrongs. And so what's interesting about our area is that, I don't know if any of you have been to the National Civil Rights Museum. So what they've done is that there's these big, these metal pillars that come down that are bell-like, and so there's a counterpart to each one that's in the museum, and it's sent out to the places all around the country where people have been lynched as part of our American story. And there is one in Coatesville. And so we don't really talk about it very often, but you could simply say, I want to go and be in that space and just wonder and try to figure out how in your own way to make right some of the things that we have not done. So even thinking about different aspects of your life or our history of our church, and so.
Do we have any questions from the online community?
I don't know. Do we have any questions? Did anybody?
No? Okay.
No? Okay. And I don't know where we are on time either, so. Okay, so we're right about that time, but I'm wondering if anybody has anything that they're wondering about, or ideas of where they might want to go now that they've heard this. Like, what's going to be your next stop?
When are you going back to the Church of the Advocate? I'd love to come with you.
Well, let's make an appointment. I mean, I don't have anything on the schedule, but I'd love to journey with you. Absolutely. Yeah. It is. And you know what's interesting about it is pilgrimage also often will call us to something after, right? So I go and I stand in the spot, and I'm trying not to be that human that's like crying and, taking off my shoes kind of like Moses and saying, like, this really is holy ground. And then God said to me, this building is literally falling down around you. Like, there are big chunks of its walls on the floor. Sure.
Does Advocate still have, the last time I was there, which was many years ago, they had big, huge nets.
They do.
All over the place
yeah.
to catch
So here,
the debris that might fall from the ceiling.
Let's see where we're. So here, I actually didn't show you this one. So here's all those nets. Yeah.
Right.
Absolutely.
Many years ago, I was at a service. It was my first visit to the church. I've been there maybe half dozen times over the years. But
yeah.
What always strikes me about that place is it, even though it's in terrible shape and part of it had been burned and fell down, it's still a place of activity, and it's still a place of mission,
and life,
and
food,
still a place of history.
Yep.
And so when I sit in there, I'm like, this is a beautiful building. It's still beautiful, but it's what goes on in there.
Yeah, yeah, it is very
And what
much a
has
living
gone
place.
on in there that is
Yeah.
so moving.
It's a stone's throw from Temple's campus, if you're trying to imagine in your head.
Oh, yeah.
You
No,
can
I
see-
worked around the corner at 17th and Montgomery for years.
Okay.
And frequently would walk over and just when it was.
And you can see
active.
more of these images. So you can sort of see the white faces up here and the traditional stained glass windows, and then the images are what would be the word, Kirk?
I find them powerful, provocative, and disturbing.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, they hurt my body when I looked at them because it's sort of the history of our black and brown siblings in this country and before. So, but when I was standing on the steps there, I thought, oh man, why does God have to call my name and say, you might have to do something about this, Emily, right? So you don't just go for pilgrimage for your own purpose all the time. Sometimes it really is for personal, but I stood on those steps and thought, oh, you're going to have to do something about this with people because this really is a holy space for me as a female human, but I think it needs to be preserved. So,
May I, Bill? I just want to speak to your question about the state of the advocate and what's going on there. So we are the Office of the Diocesan Governance is acutely aware of the situation. There was actually some worsening with a wall collapse last year, but we have convened a steering committee comprised of politicians, preservationists, historians, and we are working actively to develop a plan to help preserve and restore the Church of the Advocate.
That's super. It needs a lot of work, but again, the building could fall down and there would still be stuff going on here.
Well, what is remarkable, to your point, is the amount of ministry that goes on under the most adverse conditions, and still hundreds and thousands of people are being served out of that campus.
That's what strikes me so vividly about the place.
Yeah.
What goes on there and what continues to go on in the name of Christ.
So I know that we've come to the end of our time together, but we'll be up here for a minute if there's anything that you might want to talk about in a continued way. But thank you so much, Kirk, for being here with us, and thank you all for joining us online and all of us here in person. So if anyone wants to come, I mean, it sounds like we're going to get a mini pilgrimage to the Advocate. So if anybody would like to join us, or if there are spaces that you want to go to, invite someone to come with you. Yeah. All right.
Thank you,
you
friends.
all. Yeah.
Thank you.